Good afternoon to everyone. We are very happy to be able to prepare this program about a topic that indeed is very sad, that is the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the never-ending story, because what is happening there, it seems that there is always a war and there is never the possibility for the people living in Afghanistan and for those that care about that beautiful country to have a certain kind of peace and stability. Because the situation in Afghanistan is also a very complicated situation. So I want to talk about the situation with some people that can shed a light on what is happening there. So I want to present, starting from my right, that is from Italy, is Stefano Magni. Stefano Magni is a journalist and one of the leading contributors for a very popular Catholic online magazine called La Nuova Bussola Quotidiana, and that also available in English with the name of the Daily Compass. I thank Stefano.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation. And then we have a guest, also another returning guest, that is a writer and attorney, and is David A. Wemhoff, that he was already present in our program about Americanism, and I'm very happy that he is back for this program. So thank you, David.
Thank you very much, Dr. Porfiri.
And then we have a new guest. We have the editor of the Journal of Political Risk, Anders Corr, that is an expert in geopolitical issues and also especially about China and also Afghanistan, because I read that you were there for quite some time. So thank you, Anders, for your participation.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I want to start with Anders. And Anders, so if you have to summarize for people that maybe is not fully aware of what is happening in Afghanistan, what will be your take? What you would say? What is developing there? Why it seems that America failed its mission in Afghanistan?
Well, I'll start by saying that it goes back to 9/11, 2001, when the Taliban protected Osama bin Laden after his attack on the World Trade Center that killed about 3,000 people in New York, almost. And President Bush, George W. at the time, decided to, basically say, either you hand over Osama bin Laden or let us find him, or we're going to go into your country and remove you as a terrorist supporter of a state sponsor of terrorism, which is what the U.S. did. So the U.S. was actually quite successful in that. It did it very rapidly back in those early years. For 20 years, the U.S. and allies were very successful in tamping down terrorism. The U.S. President Obama actually was successful in finding and removing and bringing to justice Osama bin Laden, which he found in Pakistan. And we sought for those 20 years to democratize Afghanistan so that it would be a lasting victory and not just a short-term victory. And so that democratization process, that bringing of rule of law to Afghanistan, included 20 years of educating women, for example, or educating the citizenry about what it means to vote. So all of these processes, this 20 years of process and this 20 years of nation building, was, I think, successful in many ways because it changed Afghanistan. It changed the population. It educated the population about democracy, about rule of law, and about women's rights, frankly. So, these things were actually all tremendously successful. Now, at the end, in the last few weeks, as we left, we also tried, over those 20 years, we also tried to build the military of the Afghan government and build the government. And we were, it was a big job. It's hard to start a country and create a non-corrupt government and a non-corrupt military in a country that's tremendously poor. Because, people are always not far away from their next meal, and they have to find the wherewithal to live. So that was a very, very hard job. And of course, as we left, it crumbled, as is very apparent on the television. So there was a failure to bring lasting democracy to Afghanistan, but that failure should not be completely trumped by the rest of the rest of the successes that we had in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Anders. And I want to go to David and have his comment on this. There are many people that have some doubts that democracy, American-style democracy, can work all over the world. And that maybe there are some countries in the world where democracy, or I say the American style of democracy, is not in harmony with their cultural values. So what do you think about this?
Thank you, Dr. Porfiri. I think that's a very important question. What you referred to as American democracy is also known as the liberal order. And that is based on certain assumptions about human nature. And more importantly, it bases on those assumptions a way by which society is organized. I think the best example for the crystallization of those principles is contained in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. In that, you have freedom of speech, free press, no established religion, religious liberty, and freedom to assemble and petition the government. Now, since that has been put in place, what we have seen are a lot of other dynamics let loose in liberal societies. Namely, what we have seen is things like feminism, which is to elevate the role of the woman. We've also seen things like identity politics, gender politics. All of that has flowed naturally from this idea of the autonomous individual, which leads to feminism, and which is advanced through the powerful private interests, largely through the First Amendment. So what you had in Afghanistan, having studied it a bit and visited the place, what you have in Afghanistan is you had a struggle between the liberal order and the ethnic order. And the ethnic order was led by the Taliban. The Taliban, of course, are a group of radicalized mullahs, if you want to call them that, but they are primarily Pashtun. The Pashtun are about 40% of the population now of Afghanistan. And every time there is an existential threat to the Pashtun people, they tend to radicalize and follow behind mullahs like the Taliban. This happened in 1928 and 1929, and it happened in 1880. And the tripping point, especially when it comes to the existential threat to the Pashtun people, the tripping point always seems to be the role of women. And they knew that as the Western-sponsored government was put in place, as the Western-sponsored constitution was put in place, despite all of the promises to support Islam and Sharia law, all the other articles of the Constitution effectively did away with Sharia law and made it a secular government, which would be modeled along the lines of the West. The Pashtuns understood that there was this existential threat to their existence, because I believe that they saw in the West the declining population, the loss of ethnic identity. And every time in Pashtun history, when there is an existential threat, they unify. There's, I believe, 60 tribes and some mega tribes. The big tribes are the Durrani and the Ghilzai. The Ghilzai were the fighters. The Durrani are usually the leaders. But sometimes they mix roles a little bit. There are some intertribal squabbles, but they unified. The Pashtun have the east and the southern part of Afghanistan. So I think that what you have, because Afghanistan is a Pashtun, their king established it in 1747. What you had is a pushback against the liberal order. And it was a very successful pushback against the liberal order because the Pashtun were patient. They were ethnically unified. They did low intensity warfare. I think those are and they had good terrain. It was kind of like the Vietnam War and also kind of like the American Revolutionary War.
Thank you very much. We will return on this issue, but now I want to go to Stefano. Stefano, I want to tell you, I want to ask you something. When we talk about Afghanistan now, it seems that we talk about a drama with two protagonists. One is Afghanistan, the other one is the United States of America. But indeed, we know that this drama has three protagonists, because there is, of course, the role of China also in what is happening. So I want to ask you your comment about this, and then after you, I want also to ask Anders for his own take on the same issue. Yeah, Stefan.
Yes, thank you very much for this invitation. And first of all, I need to explain something about the new Great Game. The Great Game is the name given, the nickname given to the international question around Afghanistan in 19th century, when Afghanistan was a borderland between two empires, the Russian Empire and the British Empire. So now the situation is very different, but the players are at least five, because there was not only United States, which is now gone after the retreat of this August, but other players like China, first of all, Pakistan, India, and Russia. These are the main players which share or are fighting for conflicting interests on Afghanistan. Now it seems that the major player in the area is Pakistan, but the main ally of Pakistan is China. This is very strange for an observer in Europe, because usually we think that Pakistan, with all its problem, it's still an ally of the United States. But that positioning of Afghanistan changed during the last decades, and now there are much more bonds between Pakistan and China, also because they share the same enemy, which is India primarily. And then while Pakistan is the real regional winner of the war in Afghanistan, because many Taliban units are trained in Pakistan by the Pakistani Secret Service, and the Pakistani Secret Service, the ISI, was very important in the last offensive in April-August of this year, because they infiltrated the Afghan regional regular army, and they supported the Taliban also militarily. They rely also on Chinese money. So I think that the real winner on the field is Pakistan, but behind the Pakistan there is the very larger role of China. Well, what is happening now? China is already establishing some non-formal links with the Taliban regime, at least China recognized the legitimacy of the Taliban movement by the end of July. And this is not a direct recognition to their own regime, to their own state, but it's the first step to recognize the legitimacy also to the Afghanistan new regime, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So I think that it's only a question of time when China will declare the legitimacy of the Islamic Emirate. And since last July, China also stated that it will not interfere with the internal policy of the new regime of Taliban. They did not declare it officially, but they simply had to declare that they will not interfere with the internal affairs of Afghanistan, which means that the Taliban could do what they want, and China will have nothing to say about them. A second important issue is about the Islamic minority in China, the Uyghur minority, which is actually the most persecuted Islamic minority in the world. And an external observer could think that the Taliban will support it, at least in the name of Islam. But during the last meetings between Taliban representatives and the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the Taliban's promised to China that they will not support nor the Uyghurs in China, nor the Islamic movement of Uyghurs abroad. So the Islamic movement of Uyghurs, which is the Islamic Turkestan Party, could not and will not train its forces in Afghanistan. They will be barred from the Taliban regime. And on the other side of the question, the Chinese are preparing to invest in Afghanistan also with the Taliban rule, and they will ignore their Islamic ideology. So we have a communist country which is persecuting Islam at home, but will make business with an Islamic regime abroad. And the two main lines of expansion of the Chinese interests are basically the Belt and Road Initiative, which is also claimed by the Taliban spokesman yesterday, interviewed by La Repubblica, an Italian newspaper. He stated it very clearly. We want the Belt and Road Initiative here in Afghanistan. And also the mining industry, which is now very in crisis after the civil war, and that China could restart very quickly. And China is very interested in the mining industry in Afghanistan, both for copper and for the rare earth element, which are very important for the high-tech industry of the popular republics. So
Okay,
that's the scenario.
sorry if I interrupt you because I want to go to
Yes.
our other guest.
Sorry.
Before I continue, I want to show our audience. We are broadcasting on Ritorno a Itaca in YouTube, in the Aurelio Porfiri Twitter account, and the Aurelio Porfiri fan page in Facebook. If you want to be updated about everything we are doing and I'm doing, go to Telegram and look for Aurelio Porfiri channel, and then you will be always updated on every my articles, video, and program. Now, Anders Corr. So Stefano Magni has said many things, and I saw that you were listening very with a lot of attention. And I'm sure you have also something to say about what he has said. So please.
Well, I think Mr. Magni has hit the nail on the head, as we say. It's absolutely correct that the Taliban were supported by the Pakistani ISI military elements. Osama bin Laden was hidden there in Pakistan, almost certainly with the knowledge of the Pakistani military and intelligence elements. And so we have a real problem there. And I think he's also right that the main winner in Afghanistan from this struggle has been Pakistan at this point. So he's absolutely correct on all those points. Then we look at his analysis of Pakistan's reliance on China for billions of dollars in funding, and that's absolutely true as well. The CPEC, the Chinese Belt and Road through Pakistan has come with billions of dollars, probably has included millions of dollars worth of bribes for Pakistan's leadership. And that Belt and Road program is now being pushed in to Afghanistan through Pakistan. So, China is the winner. China is a backer of Pakistan. It's has long been a diplomatic supporter of the Taliban terrorists. So essentially what you have here is China and Pakistan are state sponsors of terrorism. And it's very, very clear in the case of the Taliban. China, at a very high level, I believe Wang Yi met with the Taliban, has remarkably been the first to push the envelope in terms of diplomatic recognition. Of course, they haven't fully recognized the Taliban as a state, but they're pushing for this. Russia is also pushing for more power for the Taliban. They've argued that the money that has been withheld from the Taliban, that the U.S. government has stored in the Federal Reserve for the government, for the state of Afghanistan, should be released to the Taliban as soon as possible. I completely disagree with that. I don't think we should give a penny to the Taliban terrorists. As recently as I think June, they were blowing up district centers, police district centers, and killing civilians on purpose. So I have to basically agree with Mr. Magni. Now, that said, the U.S. has not gone from Afghanistan entirely. We very recently had a drone strike on an ISIS position, and I think those drone strikes or those airstrikes will continue against targets of opportunity, as we call them. So now on Mr. Wemhoff's comments, I actually probably disagree with some of what he said, especially the sort of ethnic analysis. I think that what Mr. Magni has said is much more to the point in terms of what is causing the Taliban to do what they do. I don't think that and it's very clear that Taliban support, that Taliban engagement with China, given the Uyghur situation, is not about culture or ethnicity, because the Pashtun are Muslims. They should, if this were a cultural or ethnic issue, the Taliban should be anti-China, but they're not. The Taliban are very friendly to China, and China is very, very friendly to the Taliban. It's about money. It's about diplomatic support that is flowing from China through Pakistan to the Taliban. I don't really think of it as having much, if anything, to do with ethnicity. This is actually the Taliban claim that it has to do with Pashtun nationalism or support for Pashtuns or support. This is how the Taliban gets support from the locals in Afghanistan. But it's all a lie, actually. The Taliban are really pro-Pakistan. They're really pro-China. It does not have to do with ethnicity, ultimately.
Thank you. And so now I go to David Wemhoff, and of course, I'm sure you want to give your answer to what Anders Corr has said now, and his comment about your position. So please go on.
Well, I think there's good in what Mr. Magni said, and there's some good points in what Mr. Corr said. You have to remember that the Pashtuns inhabit about half of Pakistan in the Fatah, or also known as Waziristan. And the Pashtuns can be a problem to the Paks also. Now, the Paks have supported the Taliban in the course of this war, and that is somewhat different from what was the situation when the Soviets were in Afghanistan. So a lot of those lines of communication have ceased to go through Pakistan into Afghanistan, and the United States discovered that and found that out. That having been said, I stand by my position that there's a very strong ethnic component here to the activity of what is going on in Pakistan. And you have to look at this, though, in the context of what's going on in the world. The Taliban have a proven history of governing the country. They were able to defeat the warlords in the process of defeating the Pocket and Panjshir. ISIS-K is of dubious origin. I was told, actually, I saw on CNN where CNN talked to the leader of ISIS-K just a couple days before the attack on Kabul airport. So I think ISIS-K has got a dubious origin, dubious connections. But the Taliban have got the ability to rule the country, and they've shown that. And the Financial Times did a pretty good story where they said, and I paraphrase, you can have all the gold in the world underground, but if you got warring warlords above ground, it's not any good. And so that's correct. And so what you have in Pakistan is what has been called the Saudi Arabian version of lithium deposits. Well, that's huge when it comes to electronic vehicles, electronic cars, to a green environment. That's absolutely huge. The U.S. went in and started in 2004 and completed in 2007 its U.S. Geological Survey. And in 2010, it announced the presence of these deposits that were rather large, again, in the Pashtun area. And again, the Pashtun, with the help of the Paks and with half their people being in Pakistan, are able to rule the country and govern that area. So after that, then, of course, they found bin Laden in 2011 and executed him or killed him. And then the withdrawal began, and you had contested elections in 2014 and 2019. The contested elections showed that the Tajiks, the Hazaris rather, and the Uzbeks and the other groups, even with nominal Pashtun leadership, just simply couldn't hold it together. And in the meantime, we have China on the rise, and China is getting more powerful. Yep, they do want the lithium and the rare earth in Afghanistan, but the Americans are not entirely out of Afghanistan. And we have within Afghanistan, as I believe Anders said, we have a number of people who have been now inculcated, attuned to what the West teaches and what the West says. So these are people who, some could consider to be a fifth column, but these are people who are going to be able to put pressure on the Taliban and help, to keep the American interest there. Americans also have an enormous amount of money and other resources that we can put into the area for the Taliban government. So I think what was needed was somebody to run the country. The previous government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, which is gone, had made deals in copper and iron with the Chinese. And there are some reports saying the Chinese are very concerned about the Taliban. I think we also have to take a look at what Vice President Harris did recently, which was to go to South Vietnam, which is a major supplier of lithium also. So we're seeing a geopolitical effort here to ring in China. And all of this comes at the time when we're seeing in major business magazines like Economic Times, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, editorials and articles about how the Chinese government is repressive and destroying their high-tech industries. So I think that there's a lot going on here, and I don't think the U.S. is out of the game at all. I think the Taliban, who has all of this equipment that was U.S. provided, is going to be in need of contractors and others to come into their country and help them maintain it. So I don't think the U.S. is out of this at all.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to go again to Stefano, and I want to have your comment on this. We were discussing before about the role of the Vatican, and we say that the Vatican has not said too much about all these questions. But we can observe that the Vatican has had in recent years a kind of rough relationship with the United States during the Trump presidency, and also is trying to have a good relationship with China, as we know now with the agreement that was signed in September 2018. And then, there is the relationship with Russia. So according to your opinion, I'm asking your opinion, what would be an intelligent attitude of the Vatican in this kind of crisis? And also, we have not to forget about the relationship with the Islamic world, that is always very complicated. So what should be for you the attitude of the Vatican in this kind of situation?
Yes. First of all, it is very difficult to understand what is actually the real position of the Vatican in the Afghan question. The Pope was hospitalized during the worst days of the crisis in Afghanistan, and so he was silent during the worsening of the situation. After the fall of Kabul, the Pope and the Pope personally, not the Vatican as a state, prayed for peace and invited all of the Catholics to pray and feast for peace and for reconciliation in the country. So there is not a real political stance on Afghanistan, but only a prayer for peace and against violence. I think that this kind of political neutrality of Vatican in the question of Afghanistan, it's just because it's mainly because there are very few Christians in Afghanistan, and the situation for the Christian minority there was very dramatic, both under the Islamic Republic and now under, it's even worse, under the Islamic Emirate. We have not to forget, for example, that one Christian Afghan who converted, one Muslim who converted to Christianity years ago, when there was the legitimate Afghan government, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, was hosted in Italy because he risked the death penalty. So I think that for Christianity and for the Christian minority in Afghanistan, the situation there was always dramatic, both under the legitimate Islamic Republic, which was called Islamic, not by chance, but because it was inspired by the Islamic values and laws. And now it could be even worse under the Islamic Emirate. What I would like to see, of course, is the protection of Christians' rights there, like it was before the Taliban takeover. And if possible, and for what is possible to do, I hope that the Vatican continue to not only speak but also diplomatically act to save as many lives as possible. And the other roles of the Vatican is about the refugee crisis, which is one of the main topics always for Pope Francis. Now the situation is very different from the past. This is not an economic migration. This is a real refugee crisis. And the Vatican is rightfully pressing on European governments to do something to save as many people as possible. Of course, I think that it's not possible to give a refuge to millions of people, but I think that the best strategy possible is to host them in Muslim countries bordering with Afghanistan, which could be not only closer to the borders of Afghanistan, but also closer to the cultures of the refugees.
Thank you, Stefano. And I want to ask a similar question to Anders Corr. And so for you, according to your political analysis, your geopolitical view, what can be the weight of a player like the Vatican that is not really a political power, but it's a spiritual, a moral power, we may say. So what would be for you the weight of, or you think that their word maybe is not so important in this kind of situation?
Well, I think, I would definitely say that prayer is important and good. So that approach is, I think, quite right. I think that as far, I do agree with, again, with Mr. Magni on much of what he's just said. And I do have to say that there are some points that Mr. Wemhoff said that I just can't agree with again. So first of all, the Taliban do not have a, quote, proven track record, unquote, of governance. The Taliban were horrible in their governance. They were not only killers to get into what they did and after what they did, but they destroyed the Buddhist statues at Bamiyan, for example. That is not a proven track record. And worst of all, for Afghanistan, they did something. They hid Osama bin Laden, which was a horrible decision in government, and that resulted in a 20-year war with the United States and the Taliban's removal, and flight. So no, we can't say that they have a proven track record. They have just the opposite. They're horrible. They're horrible at making governmental decisions. Now, the governmental elements that remain in Afghanistan, for example, in Panjshir, again, are not a fifth column. They are the remnants of the legitimate government of Afghanistan that was actually elected by the people to run the country, and not just handed over because mafia style to the Taliban, who were able to collapse the government, I would argue, probably through, definitely through threats, mafia style threats against existing leaders in Afghanistan, and probably through the bribery that comes through Pakistan and China. So no, the pro-American elements in Afghanistan are actually pro-democratic elements in Afghanistan. They're not a fifth column. Third, I would ask Mr. Wemhoff what reports he's talking about that the Chinese are worried about the Taliban. It appears to be exactly the opposite. The Chinese welcome the Taliban because the Taliban defeated the not defeated, but the Taliban did chase out the US-supported, democratically elected government. So, of course, the Chinese support the Taliban. I'd like to see his evidence on the contrary.
Thank you. So, David Wemhoff, you were he's commenting a lot about your opinion, so you can answer.
Okay, thank you. Well, there have been a number of reports. I think that they're from Financial Times. I think that they're also from the mainstream media about the concern that the Chinese have. They're feeling a little jittery with the Taliban taking over. The reality is, Anders, is that you've got the Taliban who were able to stabilize the country. Maybe it was done brutally. Maybe it was done in a way that the West didn't like it, but they were actually able to stabilize it and exert control and power. And when you had the government of Afghanistan, which has now been chased from power, what you had a lot of fighting. And you had a lot of fighting in the critical areas, which is in the east and in the south. That's where the rare earth and the lithium is. So, the Taliban are going to stop that fighting when they take over. And they've taken over. Now, we may disagree on what we term the people who are left in the country who still have Western leanings, but I'm sure the Taliban will look at them as a fifth column. I'm sure that I think you agree with me, that the Americans and the West will look at them as allies and people to be protected and defended, and that will then exert power on the Taliban government, some kind of effort or force on the Taliban government. We have to take a look at how the world is now. And the reality is we have nations and we have countries, but we also have what I term a global plutocracy. You have people with economic interests in countries all over the world, and they are trying to tear down all sorts of boundaries that they can possibly tear down. And they want to get to all sorts of minerals and markets that they can possibly get to. So it's much better to have somebody run the country, even if it's a dictator, so that you can get to those assets and you can use those assets, perhaps in competition with the Chinese, and also too, perhaps in competition with other enemies of one plutocratic class or another. And so I think we got to the point where you see a war with China from the United States. A trade war started with Trump, and it has continued under Biden. And there is this tension here, which is escalating. And I think that it is in the benefit of the Americans to keep some kind of pressure on the Taliban, who are able to exert some kind of control over that country.
Thank you. And I think that Anders want to say something about this. Please.
Well, I respectfully disagree again. No, it is not good for the Taliban to use Afghan assets because what they're going to use them for, they're going to get income or revenues from those assets, and they're going to use those to support terrorism. We've seen this historically. Already you're going to see their support of terrorism. Now, where is that terrorism going to be directed? We've also seen, since you mentioned the mainstream media, for example, we've seen in the Wall Street Journal a Russian analyst who claims that the Taliban have agreed not to allow terrorism that's directed north or east. In other words, it's not going to be directed at China, and it's not going to be directed at Russian interests. As you say, I mean, the Chinese are wrongly concerned about the Uyghurs, which they fakely claim are creating massive terrorist groups. In fact, that's a justification, a false justification for genocide in China. And so no, I don't agree that the Chinese are truly concerned with terrorism emanating in their direction. I think what you're going to see is Chinese and Pakistani use of the Taliban and Afghanistan, which is now a terra nullius, to train terrorists that will be targeting places like India, Europe, and the United States. So no, none of this is good, and we shouldn't give a single inch diplomatically or economically to the Taliban.
Thank you, David. You want to reply?
Well, I don't want Mr. Corr to think that I am approving of Taliban rule. I'm just simply relating to you what I believe is the objective reality. And I believe that in this country, in this world, where we really have a more and more globalized elite, they are looking at this thing from a number of different ways. And I think that what we have to realize is that there's a constant sifting that goes on between different interests and different powers. We know that financial and global elites have always supported one dictator, perhaps, if it advances their interests, or another. And there is clearly an economic value to the property that the Pashtuns sit on. And there's clearly a value to not having people fighting over it. There's no doubt about that. So then the question is going to be, who's going to get in there and deal with them? And the Chinese don't have any deals, as far as I know, to get the lithium or the rare earth. They may have had some deals on the copper and the iron, as I said earlier, but not on the lithium and the rare earth, which is considerable, but I believe it's just like 5% of what China has. So as far as that goes, I think that what you're dealing with is a situation which is going to be one that is going to allow outside interests to deal with the Taliban. Now, part of the U.S. deal in Doha, as you know, from February of 2020, is that the Taliban would not serve as a basis for any sort of terrorist attacks against the United States, or the country would not serve as a basis for any terrorist attacks of the United States. That was a separate deal made. The Americans pulled out. And once again, I have to ask, what's the origin and the genesis of ISIS-K and some of these other groups? The group in Panjshir, I understand, that may be the government that was put in after the fact. However, they are going to be slowly reduced from the latest reports I've gotten and read today. So what I'm saying is that you now have a more stable situation in a very geographically important part of Central Asia, and one that is going to open itself to economic development or colonization, as the case may be, because every day we're hearing stories about how badly the Taliban need to provide for their people. And I think even your publication, Anders, at the end of June, deals with a program by which the people in Afghanistan would be able to receive economic benefit from the minerals there on the ground. And perhaps you could delve into that.
Thank you. Before I go to Anders, do you give me 2 minutes? Because I want to go to Stefano, that was listening to everyone, and then I will give you the possibility to answer. But I want to ask to Stefano one question. If you can please be very brief, because we are running out of time. And my question is about Taiwan. Many people are saying, "Oh, now Taiwan should be afraid because the United States help in case of trouble may be not so assured, seeing the situation how is developing now." So, very synthetically, what do you think about this?
Yes, just one word before, because I would like to say something about the previous debate. I think that it's very interesting what is saying David Wemhoff, because it's like the thinking behind the Biden administration. I think that the Biden administration is thinking it's a Chinese problem. It's their problem, and China will pay for it. But I think it's wrong, at least in the short run, this logic, because China is very pragmatic, and it will. It is supporting every neighbor which is in conflict with the United States. So I think that China, in the short run at least, I mean in the next 5 to 10 years, will be in a very good relationship with the Taliban. And it has all the interest to do that. And for Taiwan, it's even shortest consequence of the US retreat, because China is just looking for an example to scare its neighbor and its enemies. China is communicating a very brutal and simple message to Taiwan. USA will not come to the rescue, because USA abandoned an allied even after 20 years of war and promises, and billions of dollars spent for its defense. So the message is clear. The Taiwanese government, the Taipei government, has to surrender to the Chinese requests, because USA will never come to the rescue. I don't think that that's true, and it's possible to make a comparison between Afghanistan and Taiwan, because Afghanistan was always an unstable situation, if not a failed state like now, while Taiwan is a very consolidated democracy, solid democracy. So I think that it's very different situation, but China is using this message for propaganda in order to scare any of his enemies.
Thank you, Stefano. Anders.
So first of all, on Taiwan, I would say that I don't think Taipei Taiwan, the country of Taiwan, which is a sovereign country that's unfortunately not recognized by many countries, most countries, including the United States, which should change that. But Taiwan will not easily acquiesce to China. And I think that Taiwan is looking for a strong U.S., not only U.S., but Japanese defense. Taiwan is critical as a southernmost point in the Japanese archipelago. Actually, Taiwan is critical to Japan's defense. So Japan will be very, very, and the U.S. will be very strong in terms of Taiwan's defense. I have no doubt about that. And I don't think, I think the Afghan thing is overplayed, actually. But really, I mean, Taiwan, if we want to get serious, what Taiwan needs to truly defend itself, because when you're dealing with a nuclear power like China, the only real defense is your own independent nuclear deterrent. Now, that's what Taiwan needs. It needs its own independent nuclear deterrent. Japan needs it. Australia needs it. South Korea needs it. This is how you defend a country for real, if you're really serious about defending your country. Now, on Afghanistan, what Mr. Wemhoff said, no, absolutely not. Afghanistan is not more stable after the Taliban takeover. It's less stable. Why? Because the Taliban are going to make massive mistakes, and they already are making massive mistakes. And those mistakes are going to lead to not only instability within Afghanistan, but global instability. And this is what we see today. We see the Taliban win as globally destabilizing to the international order of rule of law, where countries respect each other's borders, where countries do not use terrorism against regular civilians. All right. This is an unstable world, and it's an unstable Afghanistan. So no, it's not more stable. What the Taliban can be sanctioned economically, and they should be sanctioned economically. If you reward the Taliban with trillions of dollars of rare earths, of oil, of copper, okay, you're rewarding terrorism. And what does that do? It makes other terrorists around the world rise up and want to do the same thing, because they can clearly make trillions of dollars, billions of dollars through terrorism. So rewarding terrorism by encouraging resource extraction from Afghanistan is a horrible strategy. Now, finally, China already has copper deals with Afghanistan on the Mez Ainek copper mine, which is worth trillions of dollars trillions of dollars of copper there, and it already has oil exploration deals in Afghanistan. China's a huge winner. You can go back to the reporting and see that China has already been probably paying off the Taliban for the rights over the past years to continue operations at Mezainik, the copper mine. So, these guys have a long relationship with the Taliban, and rewarding China, rewarding Pakistan, rewarding the Taliban with resource extraction under the fake mantle that it somehow is causing stability is unfortunately totally irresponsible.
Thank you, Anders. And I give the word, but only for 1 minute, because then I have to conclude the live streaming. So 1 minute to David Wemhoff for his own answer to what said Anders Corr. So 1 minute, and then we will conclude. Please.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I just want to repeat what we're talking about is this a massive amount of lithium in the Pashtunistan. That's what we're talking about. And you need the ability to have some sort of peace there in order to extract it. Now, if there's any unhappiness with people who want, who want to extract that, then it should be directed at the people who want to extract that. I mean, obviously, some people will benefit from that and others won't. But the reality is you're going to have a peaceful area now in Pashtunistan, which includes half of Pakistan. And how Pakistan will play that and how the Taliban will play that really remains to be seen. But they will probably go to the highest bidder. And if it is used to advance terrorism, I think we all agree that that's wrong. I'm just simply stating the fact that you need the end of the fighting in these areas to get to those resources.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we have really no more time. So I want to thank a lot all the panelists for their contribution. I'm sure that will make this program very informative for everyone that will see from all over the world. So thank you to Stefano Magni, to David Wemhoff, and to Anders Corr for their participation. I hope they will be our guest again. And thank you for the people that will watch this streaming, and I hope that you will also watch our other program in the channel, where we put videos in English and in Italian, mostly in Italian, but also in English. So thank you very much again, and see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.